traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay tribute for their history, their culture and their ongoing contributions to our community. And I do join with everybody here today in remembering the many people who tragically lost their lives recently in the boat that went down off Java. And it is a time to remember that many boats have sunk. There has been about 22 boats in the last 13 years that between Indonesia and Australia have sunk, with so many people have lost their lives. And at this time when there is such controversy, which is really driven by the appalling policies of Labor and the opposition, that we need to go back to basics here. When people flee their country, there will be disorder, it will be disorderly, it will be difficult, particularly when they take their family with them. Their response is not the problem. The problem is the way countries like Australia, and particularly Australia at the moment, is mishandling the refugee issue. It's a lack of a humanitarian approach. It's a failure to abide by our international obligations, which is causing the problem here. The figures are really quite astounding in terms of how few refugees Australia accepts. Of all the refugees accepted by Western countries, only about 2% come to Australia. The number of refugees that arrive in Italy each weekend is about the equivalent of what Australia accepts every 6 months. We do need to increase the number of refugees who are able to come to this country. We certainly do need to change our policies urgently. And I would urge the Minister to very clearly reassess the policy that he is enforcing at the moment. It is deeply worrying about these talks with the opposition, because they could then come to a position where refugees will be processed maybe in Nauru, maybe in Malaysia. For a long time the Greens have called for a bipartisan approach on this issue, but it's a bipartisan approach that's based on a humanitarian position. And that's where we need to remember that this can be done. And it's in recent times, in the 1980s, under former Prime Ministers Malcolm Fraser and Bob Hawke, where there was a program that ensured that refugees, because of turmoil in Southeast Asia, because of turmoil in Latin America, were then given assistance to come to Australia. For a period, people were losing their lives in the 1980s in boat tragedies, and it's where, to their credit, particularly to Malcolm Fraser, that was dealt with. And it was dealt with in a humane way, a responsible way, with us abiding by our international obligations, and those people could come to Australia. That's the sort of bipartisan approach that the Greens are talking about. Not this bipartisan approach that Chris Bowen, as a minister, is now working on, where it's at the lowest common denominator effectively. And it is not going to stop the boats. People, if they're going to be locked up on Nauru or Manus or Malaysia in this very cruel outcome that we've been seen enforced for 2 years now, will be still attempting to come directly to Australia. And it's worth remembering that. So-called position this so-called position that they're getting tough with people smugglers, forcing people to go to the back of the queue and abide by their positions, that's all just more law and order talk. From Julia Gillard as Prime Minister to appear that they are being tough and that they're outdoing the coalition. It's not going to actually stop the boats coming, because again, to go back to the point that I opened my comments with, when people are desperate, when they're looking to save their family, that they're under such threat in their home country, they will risk the boat trip. I understand that many of the people who survived the latest tragedy of the boat that sunk in Java have said to journalists that they will try again and go in and get into another boat to come to Australia. So just by saying that we're processing people in Malaysia, Nauru, Manus, whatever they come up with, might get the government a headline and say they can then get the coalition off their back for a while. But it's certainly not a responsible way to deal with refugees. It's not enforcing, it's not abiding by our international obligations, which we always need to go back to.